And I'm live this time with Kate Ledogar, who has a Substack called Here Are the Meat Bastards. She's an artist and a writer and definitely a carnivore. Is that right, Kate?
A carnivore. Yeah, I'm a carnivore. That's interesting. I don't. How is that pertinent? That's an interesting detail.
Right, and why do you call your Substack the Meat
Oh, I
Bastard?
see. Oh, because of the Substack name. Okay. Well, so the reason for the name of the Substack is my husband and I were out to dinner with our friend Paolo, who's from Italy, and this was a misunderstanding. Paolo was trying to say something to my husband about people who'd come into his restaurant. Somebody had come into his restaurant, and he was saying, the guy, the Scottish guy, the meat bastard. And my husband saying, meat bastard, and Paolo saying, yes, yes, meat bastard. And finally, his wife said, Paolo, are you trying to say Mythbusters? And Hellas said, yes, yes, meat bastards. So we just thought that was the funniest thing. And I love the idea of this word meat bastards standing in for Mythbusters, busters, and the concept of Mythbusters. So I thought, I think I could name my Substack. Here come the meat bastards. So that's yeah,
Right.
it doesn't
Okay,
particularly.
as exposers of the truth,
What's that? Yes, yeah.
as people who expose the truth
I
of
hope
myths.
to. I hope to provide that because what I like to do is to challenge assumptions, whether that's my own assumptions or other people's assumptions or broadly societal assumptions. Because I think there are a lot of them, and I think
Mhm.
that's like worst territory are the places that we think we can take for granted that we have it right. And so, yeah, that's what I do hope to do.
Well, yes, I really think it's exasperating the number of people I come across who treat their beliefs as if they were, well, I would say defective infants. And it's like, well, if you really believe in something, at least subject it to um, well, scrutiny, investigation,
Mhm.
interrogation,
Yeah.
challenge, and concede if you can't defend your position. I always assume that this is what people do.
Okay.
It's like political activists. I believe the world is about to end, and I will, cite authority and not you either agree with me or you don't,
Yeah.
and if you don't, you're my enemy, and
Yeah.
block.
I think that's just so useless because there's no hope for anybody understanding more. You don't have to agree with somebody. I really like a writer named James Howard Kunstler, and I started hearing about him because he wrote about building, just the ugliness of the American built environment, and I I found that just so interesting. And then I started listening to him more. He has a Substack, and he talks a lot about gets into political areas, cultural areas, not all of which I agree with completely, but a lot of which I've learned a lot from, and have changed my thoughts on things quite a bit, some of which I still don't agree with him. But I think I've benefited so much more from being able to learn from Kunstler than being offended by one or two or three points that he says and just rejecting everything, which is what has happened in many ways to him from like the liberal left that used to embrace his ideas about built environment um, theories.
Mhm.
And but when that's packaged with more challenging political and sociocultural ideas, it's the baby's out with the bathwater. and I just think that's useless. It's you learn. You don't have to agree. You do not have to agree with everything a person says. And that's part of the beauty of relationships too. I think our ability to disagree with each other and still meet each other on a human level, on a personal.
Yes, but I really think it has something to do with feminine, um, well, women in public life, basically, because I think it's women generally who take it as a personal insult if you disagree with
Hmm.
them, and will hate you forever and try and destroy you if they will treat you as their mortal enemy if you don't agree with them.
Interesting.
Well, I think men are less likely to
A
do
little bit
that.
more of a thick skin, or maybe less of a need to identify, to have I don't know, like a intimate connection or something. Maybe there's something to that, the way that women tend to be friends versus how men tend to be friends. I don't know. Imagine there's stuff to look into there, but yeah, I try to. I think that if anything, I, I have been maybe accused of being too much of a peacemaker, maybe not challenging enough. And I think partly that is not wanting to get in the territory where people are going to just close themselves off to what I have to say. Because a lot of the things, I think, I don't want them to close themselves off. The people who I feel need to hear it are the ones who need to keep their ears open. Am I?
Yes,
Yeah.
I mean, for me, I've tried a combination of being playing the courtier, agree, and then I think that the two kinds of people. People who can be reasoned with, and people who will basically stick to their
Mhm.
position no matter what, even though it's not true and completely illogical. But that's what they want to hold
Yeah.
on to.
Yeah. And that's also, I think I don't know. I think you had perhaps made a comment on one of my either writings or a podcast or something like that, or maybe it was on the Jason Horsley episode. Um, and I saw what you were saying, and I thought, huh, that's an interesting new angle on things. Not something I've ever considered. You know, but I think that perhaps some people would say, oh, that's coming from not my place, not my angle of thought. But to me, that is something that makes me want to say, all right, well, what is that about? And so that is
I was probably praising Trump,
I
wasn't
don't I
I?
don't I don't know. No, it wasn't. I don't think it was a Trump thing, but it was something where the secular Quranism came up, and I just thought, huh, I've never heard of that concept before. And
Hmm.
I just thought, all right, well, I'd like to know. That's something. I think sometimes the more unusual something is, the more I'm inclined to want to learn about it, because I think this could be a fresh perspective, maybe.
Yes. Well, thank you for being prepared to consider it, but I'm basically relating it to the farewell speech of George
Mhm.
Washington, and I'm saying therein lies the evidence that the founding fathers were proto-Muslim.
That's very, wow, huh? And so, are you saying that it's like essentially Muslim, or that they actually had the Muslim religion in mind when they were saying this?
Okay, this is a theological point, but um, Christians are supposed to believe in the Trinity,
Hmm.
and over the centuries, I've discovered that Christians who lived in under absolute Christian monarchs who questioned the Trinity were burnt as heretics. And being educated men, the founding fathers found that objectionable, but they still believed in God, I
Wait,
think.
they found what objectionable? The belief in the Trinity or the burning of the heretics?
Yes, the compulsion, the coercion, and the threat of state violence and state sanctions
Again,
to what would happen to them if they, question the Trinity.
yeah. And so you were talking about how you said in the last 200 years it's been a movement toward Republican type of government, away from monarchy, and monarchy essentially being religious, things that are tied to a god, right? God given um, right to rule. Would that
Yes,
be?
the divine right to rule, and
Yeah.
and I think in the Declaration of Independence, Jefferson basically equated monarchy with tyranny.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Um, yeah. All right. Uh, well, I guess go on with that in terms of what you were saying with George Washington and
Yes, yes. So one of the things I that stuck in my mind about was just a book of quotes. But anyway, I remember Washington saying we must, with um, caution, indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion.
yeah.
And I suppose people at the time thought, oh well, we'll just be Christian.
Mm.
And then he also said, so later in his speech, uh, that um, what was it? Um, good, sorry, justice towards all nations is the practice of religions. And I thought, yes, that sort of made sense until I examined the New Testament some years later and realized it doesn't say anything about foreign policy.
In the
It
New
says
Testament.
nothing.
In the New Testament.
No, exactly.
I've been reading the Bible for over a year now, just reading, cover to cover, tiny bit each night, and I'm halfway through the New Testament at this point. But the Old Testament certainly has a lot about foreign policy in it.
Exactly, the requirement to exterminate Amalek and all that. But
Yeah.
but since we're not Jews, and we don't know where Amalek are or whether they're still in existence, I think that that's the excuse Jews use because it's a religious obligation for them. Which I spoke to a Jew once, and he was obviously troubled by it.
Mm.
That Jews were ignoring some religious obligation. But anyway, there are many principles of warfare and international relations mentioned in the Quran, and I thought, well, logically, that must be the religion that Washington meant, even though he didn't quite dare to say it at the time.
Interesting. So you are talking about a direct reference to Islam in Washington's farewell speech, or in the founding fathers, that was you are making a guess that they really had that in mind at that
Well,
time.
there is a White House Quran. It belonged to Thomas Jefferson, who owned a copy when he was a law student in 1765. And I think it's on record where he even bought it from. Um,
And so,
so,
yeah.
mm.
Well, so you're saying that the New Testament really has no guidance on foreign policy, but
And very little else.
or very little, but the Quran does.
Yes, yes, it's full of rules, which is why some people hate it so much. But
Yeah,
there are certainly rules in it.
yeah. It's funny. My younger son played me a it's a YouTuber, of course, who puts history to rap songs, and this one, I forget which rap song it was. Something, something current, but it was all about Islam, and talked about the 5 pillars of Islam, and then also talked about Islam through the world. And they were saying that they, in this, simplistic song made for kids to understand a religion or a culture, they said that Islam would go into countries and force the people to their religion, but then be tolerant of their culture. And so it's marked. And then they showed all these pictures of different Islam groups around the world and how varied they are. How the culture of where they're from
Hmm.
comes through, is not changed, but they are then believers in Islam.
Yes,
Is that
there's more than one way of interpreting all these rules. There's more than one interpretation of yeah.
mhm. Yeah. Well, it's, I guess, with the Bible, certainly people interpret things in different ways too.
Hmm.
But is there for Islam a parallel with, in Christianity? There are people who are kind of strict Bible. Uh, there's a word for it, but they just read the Bible as Bible literalists. Are there similar? Is
Well,
there a
the
similar
thing is,
trend?
there's nothing in the New Testament to take literally because there are, virtually no clear instructions about anything.
A lot of
So even
parables.
if you try to use the New Testament as a set of rules, because it says nothing clearly, it can't really be done. And if you ask Catholics, Catholics will say, "Well, we never followed it. We just
Yeah, well, there's a lot of
well,
that.
well, they didn't exactly say made up the rules as we went along, but that was
Mm.
basically what they did."
Yes, and yeah, I do see that. See, I grew up with a Catholic school till about through 5th grade. So I did get a lot of basic kind of Catholicism, but it wasn't until I got to know some evangelical Christians in the last recent years that I really met people who seemed to be living in a much more directed way um, from the Bible, and there's a lot of Bible study that goes on too. So it is, as you say, that there's not anything clear. There are many people that, unlike Catholics, that kind of, I think, trust priests to interpret and give the message from what they're reading. The evangelical
Indeed.
Christians do, they have a much more active relationship with trying to know the Bible and discussing it and trying to live it actively too.
Yes, yes, and talking about the Bible, I want to refer again to a founding father, this time Thomas Jefferson, who,
Yeah,
um, with his Jefferson Bible and his excision of the bits that he didn't think were quite the teachings of Jesus. So
really?
out went the Pauline epistles, all of it.
Huh. I didn't, I don't, I've heard the term the Jefferson Bible, but I didn't realize he just,
Yes, he did, and then I think it was kept a terrible secret. Like, what was he trying to do? We don't want to know. No, we don't want to know, and we won't talk about it. Which is why so many people don't know about it. But it's not the Jefferson Quran that is kind of um, well, the Jefferson Bible is more illuminating because.
for what he removed.
Yes, yes, because he's saying, oh, the miracles don't count, just the teachings of Jesus. So it became a very short document indeed. And really, if you wanted to reduce Christian wisdom to its essentials, it would be Sermon on the Mount.
Mm, yeah.
And it nearly drove me mad reading it, because it didn't seem to me to mean anything at all. But there have been, versions of it, because somebody called, oh, what's his name? Um, anyway, he was a Unitarian Christian, and he wrote a book called Sermon on the Mount,
Uh-huh.
and it's the kind of set book for AA.
For what? AA?
Oh, yes,
Oh, yeah.
Alcoholics
Yeah.
Anonymous, because they thought the only way you can wean alcoholics off um, drink is to make them pretend to promise, the creator, the somebody higher up, because if you make promises to yourself and you're an alcoholic, you're just going to break them.
So you see, are you putting aside entirely the question of, is there a God, a creator, when you talk about the secular Quranism? Do you remove that because you think that's another thing and that's not pertinent to what you're talking about? Is
Um,
that beside the point?
no, no. I've just remembered the name. It's Emmett Fox,
Emmett
who
Fox?
wrote Sermon on the Mount, and that's his sort of set book for AA. Now, as for secular Quranism, it does adhere to the First Amendment, so it's optional. It's neither forbidden nor compulsory. So, but you just have to obey the law. And then, the next question is, which of the commandments of Allah do you find so objectionable? And that was the kind of dialogue I was hoping to have with people, but they just couldn't get over their hatred and obviously refused to read it. And of course, they couldn't tell me which commandment in particular they found so objectionable, because they refused to read it.
Is that, I and excuse my ignorance here, but is it that what you'd call Sharia law in terms of the rules?
Yes, I mean, Sharia is basically laws based on the Quran, but also it comes from the Hadith, which is um, a combination of what the companions of Muhammad, said about, what he did, and obviously of historical interest, and then, how certain verses were interpreted.
And do you accept all of these rules yourself?
Well, I am agnostic, and people keep forgetting that, and I'm saying, um, well, I mean, Muslims who don't like secular Quranism will say, you don't speak Arabic, you're not even Muslim, and you're a woman, and and um my answer is that I'm a political theorist and a political activist.
Yeah.
Um, and so I'm saying that any country can adopt secular Quranism with the legal traditions of their own country,
Mhm.
and interpret it that way. There's no hard and fast rule. I mean, the Muslims haven't exactly covered themselves in glory with their interpretation, because the caliphate was dissolved in 1924.
Mhm.
So, they weren't interpreting it properly themselves. So they have no right to tell us how to do it.
Huh. Um, it's thinking, just occurring to me, on a slight side note, thinking about the New Testament and what you're saying is a lack of rules. There are there are a couple of places in what I've read so far. I'm just up to Romans now, but where Jesus says, they say, he's asked, what commandments are we meant to follow? Something along those lines. And he says about six commandments, five or six, I think. The first being that I am the only, I am the Lord your God. There's no other God. I think there's probably honoring your father and mother, not, prescription against adultery, um, so there are some rules in, I mean, I think that that's because I did kind of note that, thinking, all right, what was Jesus specifying in terms of what is expected? What is expected
Yes.
of a person, right? And there was that. So, but I suppose what you're saying in the Quran is that it's uh much more fleshed out in terms of um
Do's and don'ts.
do's and
Mm,
don'ts, expectations for behavior. Um,
yes.
and you think that this is would be beneficial to a modern Western society to follow something like that, to follow that specific.
Yes, yes, because it's the only way to have accountable leadership if, everybody in that group knows what the rules are.
Mhm.
Um, it's the only way to say, oh, hey, you're not supposed to do that, Mr. President, because our rules say the opposite of what you propose to be doing. Um, so you mentioned commandments that Christians are supposed to follow. And I think you must be referring to the Ten Commandments because
Yeah.
that's how they are commonly understood. But the Jews actually say they're for us, not for you.
Oh,
We keep the Sabbath, not you. And if you hear what the ultra orthodox say, they're saying, well, then we're supposed to actually prevent them from keeping the Sabbath. And but anyway, there was some kind of compromise because the Christians have theirs on Sunday, and Jews have them from sundown on Friday to
mhm.
sundown on Saturday, um, and this, I think, is a bit of a problem. But anyway, over the centuries, the Jews came up with the no hide law, saying, this is what Gentiles are supposed to follow, and none of it included keeping the Sabbath. And the seven no hide laws are no idolatry, no blasphemy, no murder, no theft, no sexual immorality, no eating an animal while it's still alive,
Yeah.
and the positive commandment to establish a court and legal system.
A what? A what? A court? Say that again. The last one.
The positive commandment, because the previous ones were don'ts,
Yeah.
and the last one was you must establish a court and legal system to administer the previous laws.
Oh, that's interesting. I had not. I was not aware of the. You said no hide laws. That's what they're called.
Yes,
Or Jews' rules for Gentiles.
yes, and
Yeah.
and obviously that it's not accepted because it's only in the Babylonian Talmud, and Jews don't claim that God wrote the Babylonian Talmud,
Mhm.
and I think it was made after Christianity um, came about, I believe.
Mhm.
Um, because obviously they were a bit upset that um, that their scripture was culturally appropriated
Yeah.
and interpreted by the Romans in a way that they disagreed with.
Yeah.
Um, and also that there's a question of idolatry. So I think in so much of political discourse we think we know the meaning of the word,
Mhm.
and we maybe think we're arguing about the meaning of the word with somebody else, but we have but both sides have a completely different understanding of the meaning of the word. So I guess the Jews have been too polite in saying Christianity's idolatry. And for I guess historical reasons, and so have been so have the Muslims been not saying that, and obviously there wouldn't be much point because they just get crusaded and you know whatever, and but I think the Quran does actually command them to admonish those who claim that God has begotten a son, chapter 18, verse 4,
Mhm.
and most of them don't know anything about it. So,
But you're talking about Muslims, or you're talking about Jews? Yeah.
Muslims.
Muslims. Okay. Yeah. So everybody has their levels of disagreement with each other. The in the Abrahamic religions in terms of what is idolatry being blasphemy, I suppose, too. You know, it's blasphemous to say that, is from an Islamic point of view, blasphemous to say that God has begotten a son, and then idolatrous to praise that son, right?
Yes, idolatry, I think, is commonly agreed, is the worship of anything that isn't God.
Mm,
And so, of going to pursue the whole thing further, then, God is separate from his creation, though some people might not agree.
mm,
People like Spinoza, who equates the universe with God, but
mhm,
he was excommunicated for heresy by his community in Amsterdam. And
mhm,
there are Sufis who say God is everywhere, which is a kind of pantheism, even
mhm.
though they deny it. And I suppose, these ideas are actually important in how we function and how we think, in how we identify idolatry, I
Mm,
guess.
yeah.
And whether we care, because atheists wouldn't care,
Mm.
because they think it's just as stupid to worship one god as it is to worship more than one. So they're not going to get hot under the collar about idolatry.
Well, I mean, all of this seems to boil down to the need for rules of human behavior, um, for a functioning society, and those rules coming from religions, from the precepts, is that the right word, of religions, tenets of religion. And you could find that probably pretty much in any religion across the world, in tribal belief systems, things that are coming from, ostensibly coming from a creator, as rules, as laws that serve to um, control the, say, asocial urges of the members of society, but make them something that has authority, and that authority is from, the great authority, the greatest authority, whatever that group believes is an authority. And would you say that that's
Oh, absolutely. But so I guess Buddhists would say the teachings of the Buddha, but he never wrote down anything. So
mm,
it's hearsay. Buddhist scripture is hearsay and stuff made up after the lifetime of the Buddha. And as for Hinduism, it's just a mishmash of people saying, well, I think God must be this, and I think God must be that, and he would but it is only the Abrahamic religions that actually say, hey, our scripture comes from God Himself.
comes from the word, and I
Yeah,
mean,
Moses was taking dictation,
and
you know?
the interesting thing about the Bible, or the thing that's so mysterious, how it begins, that it's all has to do with the word, that these things are coming from words. There's something, I can't remember the exact phrase. It's, I guess, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, right? So
Mhm.
created, but then it gets into something where it specifically says that words were involved, that, and you think, what is it? Have you ever read The Alphabet versus the Goddess? That's an interesting book by a neurosurgeon, I think. Um,
No, I haven't. Do tell.
it talks about, Leonard Shlain, I think, perhaps is the name. Um, Talks about how once once language went from symbolic, like character based languages, where the words were symbols for what they were referring to, when it went to phonetic language, ABC letters signifying sounds, there was a
Mhm.
shift, right brain kind of shift, or right brain drawing on the right side of the brain. Right, the right brain is the artist part. The left brain is the reasoning part. He argues
Mhm.
that when writing came about, uh, that's when laws came about. Not only did things start to be recorded, but the nature of what was recorded changed. The nature of what was happening in society changed. And I imagine that that must be fairly partly speculative because, he's talking about what happened before. Well, no, he was actually, there was writing before that because it was the symbolic writing rather than the phonetic writing. He argues that there was a shift that happened when writing happened. And writing is the essence of all of these, the root of where all this comes from, these books, the Bibles. And so I'm not saying, oh yes, he has it, he's all right, but I'm at least saying it's interesting, and it's interesting there is something to do with the fact of words in how we structure ourselves and our behavior. There I'm having a hard time putting it into words, but it's there's something essential about the bookiness of where all of this comes from.
I suppose you could say that words are ideas, and if you think of every word as expressing an idea, but then I think it kind of makes sense that the biggest idea of all is the Abrahamic God. And that would kind of make sense of the first verse of the book of John. In the beginning was a word, and the word was with God, and the word was God.
That's probably what I'm thinking of too. Well, I think there is something in Genesis, but I was also thinking of that. That's that's just fascinating to me. And so mysterious. It's just something that it's hard to get around. It's a paradox that it's almost like a koan, right? Just something that you can only meditate on to confuse your mind. And there's also, I think, something that you have to look back to the Garden of Eden story and the tree of knowledge, the knowledge of good and evil, which I've always thought of as, I've not always thought of it, but at some point I started to think of it as the duality, the knowledge of good and evil being, opposites, and coming to
Mhm.
a place where you start to reason, and then that relating to what Leonard Shlain was talking about. You're starting to use the left side of the brain, and that's where the fall that's where the fall happens. Once you get into these words, you are as gods, perhaps, because you have words, you have knowledge of black and white, right? Or, however, you just duality, you have knowledge of duality.
Yes,
But
it was Adam and Eve basically wanting to be like God,
yeah,
right? I mean, because, but the thing is, I think God psyoped them into disobeying him. Don't you think?
well,
It's like he didn't have to say, "Don't eat from the tree of knowledge and don't eat from the tree of life," and it wouldn't have occurred to them to do it. But
well,
he obviously was waiting for an excuse to kick them out.
but that also comes down to the book of Job kind of thing too. This is all, nothing happens but that it happens from God. Even Satan, as in the devil of the book of Job, the serpent of the Garden of Eden, uh, that that devil does not get to do that. Devil is a creation of God as well.
Yes, and Jews believe Satan to be God's agent provocateur and prosecuting counsel.
Hmm. Mm. Yeah.
And,
Well,
and the relationship between
yeah.
God and Job, um, God and Satan in the book of Job was basically conspiratorial. Uh, you know, so I think it starts with Job thanking God for all his blessings, and um, and Satan saying, "Huh, God, if you didn't give everything Job wanted, he wouldn't be thanking you,
Mhm.
would he?" And God said, "Want a bet?"
Mm. See, and that though, that also makes me think of the and a lot of what I'm reading with Jesus in the New Testament now makes me think of the Buddhist perspective, the Zen Buddhist kind of perspective of you just essentially you have to give up all. You have to give up all attachment to an outcome. And in Zen Buddhism, that's enlightenment, and in Christianity, that's faith. Faith
Well, I
in
come from that
faith.
kind of background.
What's that?
My parents are Buddhist,
Mm,
so um, I mean, the principles are very hard to apply, aren't they? Four noble truths, the eightfold path, and if we're kind of being made to apply them as individuals without guidance, we'll probably not even apply them properly, even if we know, by heart what those words mean.
mm. Well, certainly a lot is demanded. I mean, expected or necessary in order to have, well, paradoxically, you'd call success, but you can't think of it as such in terms of enlightenment. Um, was it what in Islam? Is there a parallel in Islam to total either enlightenment or total faith? I'm making a parallel between enlightenment and total faith, or at least a connection between enlightenment and true faith.
Oh, you mean the difference between being a hypocrite or a true believer? Is
Yeah.
that what you're saying?
Well, I'm just saying, I think there's a similarity in a Buddhist religion, or maybe I'm just speaking of Zen Buddhism specifically, between the the surrender that is necessary for enlightenment and the surrender that is necessary in Christianity. I don't know if it's the same in Judaism, but in Christianity anyway, for belief and faith, complete faith. That this is I am in God's hands.
Well, I suppose it's a kind of practice, really. I mean, Judaism has these two concepts of emunah and bitachon, and emunah is basically not knowledge, but sorry, not belief that God exists, but knowledge, actual knowledge that God exists. So,
Okay.
so the Jew doesn't, wonder at any time if God exists. He has internalized the whole idea. And the second one is. Bitachon, which is belief that God will act for the best reasons, and even if it doesn't appear to be, looking good for us, we are to continue in our obedience.
Well, that's the book of Job very much.
Exactly, and so a good example of having emunah, belief in God, but not bitachon, was Job saying, urging Job's wife urging her husband to curse God and die,
Hmm. Yeah.
because obviously cursing God, is acknowledging God's existence. But her
Huh.
advice was, you know,
Huh. Do, to the curse being a challenge in that way, or a
And the curse, um, you would only direct anything at God, be it, gratitude or anger, if you acknowledge the existence of God, because then, why would you be directing at something that you
Sure.
don't think exists?
Yeah.
Um, so the second part of it was that Job's wife did not believe that God meant things to end well for Job, and that was why she um, recommended that Job curse God.
She
Maybe there are other interpretations.
just wanted it to end or something, maybe.
Yes, yes,
Mm,
because it was just getting worse and worse and worse and worse
yeah.
for him.
Mm. And by extension for her, right? Of course.
Yes.
Yeah. Hmm. Well, in Islam, is there uh, a similar uh, goal of total surrender to the belief?
Well, yes. I mean, Muslims say that Islam is submission, or they say it's a peace, but really, it's a peace you get after you submit, right? I guess people who surrender, are in a war. It's like, oh, we've lost the war, we have to surrender,
Mm,
and accept our fate, whatever. And I guess you do get a kind of peace when you surrender or submit. You
mm,
you you put your fate in the hands of your conqueror, I
yeah.
guess.
Huh.
But
But
why
so,
not submit to truth, logic, and morality?
yeah. So you believe that these laws, these rules, maybe, you're not saying necessarily every single one, but on balance, that they provide the best roadmap for a successful society.
Um, yes, I would say that because in terms of status, um,
In terms of what?
status. You were talking about, all these religions that we might have heard of. They would have their own scripture, but really, it is the Abrahamic religions that have the highest status, and we have to wonder why. And I think it must be because the Abrahamic religions claim divine revelation.
Yeah. Yeah.
They say, well, it was Moses taking dictation from God. It was um, scribes taking dictation from Muhammad, who was taking dictation from God.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a claim of authenticity there. A claim
Or
of
at least, it would be higher status than, the Buddha's teachings being written about after his death.
mhm,
And,
mhm.
and in terms of law, I suppose, um, if you're familiar with the rules of evidence, well, a lawyer could argue that the Torah and the Quran are direct evidence of God, while the New Testament is merely hearsay evidence.
Torah and Quran, because there are the first four scriptures. Those were written supposedly by apostles, right?
Um, well,
Or
the thing,
Jesus being hearsay too. The words
yes,
of
exactly. Well, Jesus didn't write. There's no
yeah, of
book of
course.
Jesus. It's only Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, etc.
Right. So you're saying that the things that so ostensibly the words that have are in the Old Testament were words that were dictated from God. The words in the New Testament were dictated from Jesus, who was God's, well, supposedly,
Prophet.
if you believe in that, that's a part of the Trinity, was God. If you believe in the Trinity, Jesus is God, and those are God's words. But if you're looking at Jesus as a prophet, then it would be perhaps, one removed or something like that, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, the The Torah is basically the first 5 books of the Pentateuch, and only those are claimed to be from God.
Okay. Huh.
Obviously, the claim is disputed by many people. And as for the Quran, the entirety of it is from God. Um, but you didn't. You may not have seen this famous meme of Jesus talking to, I think it was him on the Sermon on the Mount, and there's a speech bubble of him saying, "Now listen carefully. I don't want there to be 4 versions of this."
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Yeah, since I was just out of those 4 versions, it was interesting to see the different voice in each of them. How those are each. I think I only became interested in reading the Bible once I had a sense that these were these were actually things written so long ago. I always had this idea that the Bible was just put together kind of ad hoc by people who were making something up. I guess that maybe it was my agnostic uh, upbringing from my mother's side. Just a very suspicious, because a lot of suspicion there as far as the capacity for religion to do harm.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, apparently the Catholic Church are famous for faking documents. So, um, and really, it goes back to the Roman Empire. Because before Rome was Christianized, it was just the pontiff. It's a Roman um, uh, word for the chief priest of the Roman Empire.
mhm.
And I imagine, Joseph Atwill. He is a bit of a purveyor of conspiracy theories, but he was basically saying it was just a piece of literature cooked up by the Roman propaganda department.
Mm. Yeah, and I suppose that's kind of what stuck in my mind from early on. Just made it all, just the whole thing seem very suspect to me and not worth paying attention to.
Mhm, mhm.
But then, as I say, knowing some evangelical Christians who were able to explain, one whose father is a preacher was able to say, no, well, actually, you know, these are real documents from the past. Just made it more interesting in that way. But then, of course, there's the question of what of those documents could be called into question.
Yes, because they were not contemporaneous accounts. Because Wikipedia is quite helpful in saying, well, we don't know when it was actually published, the book, or compiled, the Book of John, the book of, you know, um, and there's this distinction between the canonical gospels and the syncretic gospels. I forget the difference now, and they're sort of using certain techniques in literature, and we also know that the Romans, they kind of the Aeneid was a piece of Roman propaganda about how Rome was founded,
Hmm.
and so were the Georgics by the same poet, Virgil.
Once you're separated by time, you don't really know what you're getting into.
Yeah, so all we have uh, you know is competing claims. So it's like, well,
Mm,
okay, we can't really prove it, but maybe the proof um, oh, the pudding is in the eating. Oh, well, the Jews, they're still around. And some people will say, well, they're really annoying. And it's like, let's keep trying to exterminate them. And that is their kind of history, isn't it? That, oh, people have always hated us and they try to exterminate us, but we're still here because, God protects us because we're his chosen people, and, that kind of thing.
mm. Yeah, I suppose every culture has a narrative to some degree, that's promoted by some people, perhaps but that can also become a way that they're characterized.
Mm.
I don't that there's sometimes there's a difference between how somebody would see themselves versus how you might interpret the mass of a culture based on, I don't know, history and habits and things like that.
Yes, I mean, one of the features of Jewish identity is that, I guess they're always, talking about themselves and saying, why are we so few? And, um, but I think one thing that's very interesting about them was that, they were very low status people, weren't they? You can't be any more low status than being a bunch of fleeing slaves. If being a slave was no status, what about a fleeing slave? But because they followed God's instructions, they acquired for themselves a kingdom, etc., etc. So that might be, one of the reasons, I guess, why they were chosen, because they were, so low status, to make the difference between the before and after. Like, if you're selling some kind of, cleaning fluid, you always show this really dirty cooker, and then, the gleaming, shining results after,
Mm.
the detergent has been used.
Mm. Where does and again, this is my total ignorance of the Quran. Where where do Muslims stand on their interpretation of the Jews in the Old Testament, in terms of, because Islam embraces the Old Testament too, does
Yes,
it?
yes, but the Quran refers to the Gospels and the Torah. So, it acknowledges, the previous revelations, and so,
Hmm.
I mean,
But what does it? What's their take on the Judaic people?
oh,
What is
it's
their?
critical. Like,
Okay.
you don't even, keep the Sabbath, and most of you. There's a long list of criticisms about them, um, but I think, I mean, that in the Jewish Virtual Library website, they compiled a helpful list of all the references to the children of Israel in the Quran, and they are mostly unflattering. But there is an interesting verse, chapter 17, verse 104, that
Hmm.
suggests that Allah is Zionist, because it says that in the end times, if the Jews are not already in the promised land, they will be ingathered and put there in a commingled
They will.
crowd, meaning that they have to share
They
the
will.
land with Gentiles.
But that was not the original idea, right? This is your promised land. It's not promised land to share.
Well, the thing
So
was, it
in
was
the Quran,
populated by the Canaanites, so um, they did
yeah,
have they do have to live with Gentiles, because obviously they didn't kill all of them. They might have
yeah,
made them second class citizens, but there were Gentiles, and also in their in what they're required to do at Passover. I don't know if you know that they're supposed to sell all their hametz, which is basically what do you call it? It's like bread and wheat and um, stuff like that
okay.
expands. So they have to get rid of all their pasta and bread. They have
Leavened,
to destroy it or
leavened
sell
bread,
it.
all the leavened
Yes,
bread, I
the
think, because
unleavened
there's
bread.
unleavened bread is that's a matzah,
Yes.
and that's what's eaten.
So
Yeah,
so how can they do that if there are no Gentiles around? I mean,
yeah,
if the whole world were Jews, what are they going to do with that
yeah.
instruction, right?
Mm.
And they're supposed to, have a care for us and ensure that we are righteous Gentiles. Because if not, well, I mean, the current practice is that Jews sell their, granaries. I mean, or supermarkets full of, hametz to Gentiles, for $1 or £1, and then get it back afterwards. But there have been instances when the Gentiles said, "Thank you for your granary full of wheat. I'll keep it. Thanks very much." So so it would be in their own interests to ensure that the Gentile is righteous, you know, so that they are not cheated, of their property. And so I think that is something that they may not have been doing particularly well, because if they were taking the no hide law seriously, they would have to say, sorry, Christians, we have to tell you that it is idolatry. There's no way of getting around that. Very sorry, but this is what it is. But they haven't really. They've kind of assimilated and said, things like, Christianity is okay for Christians. Because there was a time in the Middle Ages that when this question arose, and the rabbis, had to somehow reconcile it, and that was what they came up with. Christianity is okay for Christians, and the reason, I believe, was because these Jews wanted to trade with Christians and run businesses and that sort of thing.
So some things that you've said about Jews and also about Christians makes me think that you feel that Muslims are more committed to actually following the rules of their religion, whereas Jews and Christians are perhaps have shown themselves over time to be a little more loosey-goosey with their rules in order to make it work with lifestyle and the society that they're living in.
Yes.
Is it true that you think that there's more, perhaps you're saying more honesty or rigor in Islam in terms of walking the talk?
Indeed, because half the Jews in existence are secular, assimilated, liberal Jews. So I guess if the ultra-Orthodox, well, I mean, they would complain that once upon a time Jews were just Jews. They didn't divide themselves into, liberal Jews, conservative Jews, modern Orthodox Jews, and the ultra-Orthodox Jews. They are, now hopelessly divided and are really more a religion of social clubs and, a proper religion. So, they're not, doing it as God, if he exists, would expect them to do it. But then I guess it's very difficult, to be a minority and saying everyone else is wrong but you, and.
Well, but you're saying that people who are Islam now are generally, there's not really so much of a cultural way to be just culturally Islam that you are practicing. What you find mostly would be practicing Muslims rather than cultural Muslims.
Well, I think cultural Muslim will become increasingly prevalent, because if you say you're a cultural Muslim, it means you don't really, you're just saying your family are Muslim, in the same way that cultural Christians say, well, I don't really believe in God, but I mean, if there's a christening or a wedding or a funeral, I would be in church to attend the funeral or the marriage or the christening. So, but the thing is, we do act on our beliefs, and if we don't believe in the afterlife, it would be harder for us to speak truth to power and follow our principles or defend them.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you? I imagine you run up against people who disagree with certain of the rules that you are advocating for that would be, well, all right, here, let me address this way. It seems that what you're advocating for in terms of rules would be what would be typically seen as conservative in terms of um, lifestyle and
Mhm.
behavior. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I do talk about restoring the patriarchy, and that gives lots of feminists and liberals the heebie-jeebies. But I say that my interpretation, though literal, is
Mm.
permissive. I make it as permissive as possible. I am, after all, not Muslim. I am agnostic, and obviously, I have to sell it to Westerners who, will hate the whole idea. But maybe it's possible to persuade them that, if they're concerned about the effects of uncontrolled mass immigration, there are ways
Mm.
of going to the root of the problem and addressing it, such as raising, white birth rates and maintaining the quality of the next generation through um, responsible married parenting.
Well, it's interesting, because these, when I wonder if there are many conservatives who don't have a background in, like, social conservatives. I'm talking about, not fiscal conservatives, social conservatives who do not have a tie to a religion with rules and laws. Do you think that mostly conservatives are conservative by virtue of following a religious code of some sort?
I think so, because all the five world religions you have heard of, have some position on supporting marriage and family values. And that's
Mm,
probably why they are the five, you know, top five, the top five religions of the world, because they do support,
yeah.
the institution of marriage and the family. But the
Mhm.
only way of supporting it is really to say, well, sorry, but you can only have sex with your spouse and no one else, and your
Mm,
spouse cannot be a member of your own sex.
mm. So you think that for societies, uh, a culture's, you would you say that you do not think that a culture can be heterogeneous, that it can be multicultural and succeed? That would be something that I mentioned before, James Howard Kunstler. That's one of his big points. So you can't have a strong, that multiculturalism and heterogeneity uh, weaken a society. Would you? Is that your perspective as
Well,
well?
no, no, because all empires are logically and necessarily multicultural.
Mm.
So you can't, as an empire, you're not, just one ethno state. You do it means you have conquered
Is
other
not
races, and
not talking about ethnicity, but talking about unifying shared system of values. That is essential.
I see the no-hide laws as the minimum of morality, you know, and your society can only enjoy, peace and prosperity if these minimum rules are being observed and enforced and agreed to.
Mm. So, but these minimum rules that you talk about are, some of them are completely antithetical to a modern or contemporary, uh, more liberal um, status quo that's
W-
developed.
w-
Would you
Yes,
say?
yes, because I think the presumption, okay, the standard of liberal sexual morality
Mm,
is that you are allowed to have sex with another provided he or she is another consenting adult. So incest is okay,
Mm.
same-sex sex is okay, and the other kinds of, so, um, and I guess I'm suggesting that it needs to be raised, and obviously there will be a lot of vested interests who don't like this proposal to raise the price of sex.
What would be the cost? What would be how do you mean that there's would be some punishment or something? I mean, what do you mean?
Well, e- marriage, I think we can both agree, is the most expensive form of sex for men, anyway. It's like
Mhm.
you have to, well, pay for her and the kids,
Yep.
and if you take a wife, she will expect to have children, and so it's not just her, and so I think many men balk at the idea of having to marry in order to have sex. But there are, in fact, alternatives that are not forbidden in either the Quran or the Bible. And I've been saying that slavery and prostitution are not forbidden in either the Bible or the Quran.
Right. So, um, are you advocating for either of those things in terms of saying, well, if they're not forbidden, then that they are somehow can be a part of a functioning
Well,
society?
yes, because we go back to the American Republic, because technically slavery is still legal in your prisons. So you
Mm.
have prison
Yeah.
labor, and in the state of
When-
Nevada, prostitution is legal. Well, not in the whole of it, but um,
But are you saying that that is functional, and would you say that's okay
uh,
in terms of your secular Quranism?
yes,
Do you think that include
I,
them?
I think if you suddenly raise the price of sex to um,
Mm.
men will just become very rapey, and therefore um, I would support licensed brothels in red light districts,
I see what you're saying.
which
Mm.
exist in parts of Europe anyway, and in America. I think
But what? Oh, sorry. When you're saying raise the price of sex, what would be the cost then? Again, what's the cost? What's that stake for an extramarital affair or getting somebody pregnant, and then walking away? You're saying that there should be costs,
uh, yes.
repercussions
So,
for
so,
that.
so there is a verse in the Quran that treats unmarried parents as sex offenders, attracting the penalty of 100 lashes in public. But the thing is, well, people can get away with it in the sense that if no illegitimate offspring is produced, then the penalty doesn't kick in. And
Right.
we live in an age of modern contraception, so you have to be very careless indeed to get yourself knocked up.
So, but you are advocating for a cost, um, some kind of a punishment, whatever that might be in this time, this day and age, if you become pregnant or impregnate somebody that you're not
Well,
married to.
I would make it, open and shut. So, in America, you still call your marriage certificates marriage licenses, which is a very
Mhm.
interesting word because it means your marriage license licenses you to have sex and children with your marriage partner.
Hmm. Is that true? Are you are you putting that interpretation to it, or is that a literal uh, reason for the license? Do you see what I'm saying? Does that really have? Well, I mean, I guess it wouldn't if there's no repercussion to having sex outside of marriage
Yes.
or
So
children outside of
currently, I think even underage sex is now part of the culture, which is why we have the problem of the grooming gangs in Britain. But I'm saying that because America still uses the word license, you know, in this piece of paper that you get when you marry from the government. Well,
Yeah, I can see what you're saying. I can see what you're saying, because what would it be otherwise? What is it otherwise, other than that licensing your intimate relationship?
yes. Which I suppose is an unattractive idea to many, because there was once a time when people were if they wanted to own a dog, they had to have a dog license, didn't they? Um,
What you mentioned the grooming gangs. I've heard that there's some uh, people write about this, and they can write about it in a more kind of racist way, talking about that they're Muslim men who are. Is this what you're referring to in
yes,
Britain?
yes.
And I read an interesting article. Somebody was saying, yes, they're Muslim men. However, this is just like you shouldn't look at this as a way to. Essentially, they're saying like this is kind of just how businesses emerge amongst groups of people from certain places. It's not significant necessarily that they're Muslim, but people are trying to make it significant. I suppose making it significant because doing that is very much prohibited, right? Would it be prohibited? I mean, I think it would be prohibited.
What child prostitution rings? Yes, of course,
Yeah,
because
I
that's
mean
what they
that's
are, child prostitution rings.
and I don't know if this is off topic, but like how would you interpret that in terms of behavior amongst people who are uh, supposed or culturally would be following the Quran?
Well, they're obviously not good Muslims, but then
Yeah.
what I'm trying to focus on is really that um, they're only upset that the um, that it's not the white criminal classes who are operating these child prostitution rings. What happened to the white criminal classes? Most of the crime gangs in the UK are foreign.
Is that really true? I mean, because I hear this, and you live there, so you'd be more. But then I always think I think on both sides of it. I think you know is that because people who are trying to say immigration is a problem are saying, oh, look at all this crime, or is this something that other people are saying, oh no, it's not a problem? What is your take? Is that it is a problem?
Well, I'm saying that there is a cause to all of this, and it's to do with Western governments no longer supporting marriage. Because
Okay.
if because it's like if you don't like mass immigration, then have enough school leavers to enter your labor force. Manage your labor relations. Produce
Yeah.
enough school leavers who are seen as desirable employees who will enter the labor
Enough
force.
school leavers? Did you say people who are not going through university? You're saying?
Yeah, because they're not even educated properly, right? I mean, this is the problem that has existed for decades. That business organizations have been complaining to the government. These people who leave school and they can't read, they can't count, they can't write. What's wrong with them?
Mhm. You're talking about white as well as second generation British people.
I think they were just complaining of all the applicants to the positions they have available.
Okay, who, whatever color, race they
Yeah.
are. They're just in terms of the British labor pool.
Yes.
you're talking about. Mhm, mhm. And so you are equating that with just a problem in terms of there being no kind of a you think that's this could be remedied by having more of a what you might call a moral compass, ethical compass, set of rules guiding how people should be, how people should behave.
Yes, because I think it all stems from sexual morality, because the school problem is basically there are these unfit mothers who are rearing their children in fatherless homes. They go
So
through the school system and, they lower standards.
so are you is a really central part of what you are why you are advocating for secular Quranism, the sexual immorality part of it. Is that like the center of the problem that you see?
Yes, bad parenting, which is also a
Okay.
biblical, well, it is mentioned in
Mhm.
the Bible, I believe.
Hmm. Hmm. Um, it is interesting. It is certainly a part of the culture. I mean, coming from the United States, we've got our own version of that, certainly. There is, I think, a very interesting um, thing that I started thinking about more recently was what welfare laws did to Black families in this country. And that once you had women being supported, but only if they did not have a man
Mhm.
in the house. And then there was that support with no man, and then more support for more children. You had something that gave, I don't know if it made it more. There was no, on the one hand, there was no incentive to have a strong family, and in that case, strong Black families. They said that that's what it ended up really
Mhm,
impacting.
mhm.
Who's uh, the who's the conservative? Oh goodness, I'm sure there are more than one of them. It's just one that I found on some Substack recently, who's very interesting. A Black man. Um, I think he started talking about these things in the 70s. Uh, um, I have to
Mm.
look.
The same thing
I
is
just
happening in, the UK, because, I can kind of see why they would be doing it. It's like, well, if you're all on your own, then you're more unfortunate than somebody who's got the father of the children still living with her. But then,
yes,
unless you take a really strong position, well, you shouldn't be having sex with, somebody who isn't your husband. Naughty, naughty, you're going to
right,
be, I don't know, send it to the home for fallen women or something. You're
yeah,
not really going to discourage it, because you will be
yeah,
incentivizing it by paying them more.
right, right. There's the incentivization issue. Punishments and rewards. Um, so you're saying that when you have a system of punishments, because those that Islam and those rules come with punishments or disincentives. What might have been lashings back in the day. I don't know, what would it be now? A fine or something like that, something.
Well,
Uh,
being a literalist, I would say, well, sorry, it'll be 100 lashes at the local shopping mall, or something.
are you
I don't
serious?
know. Where's it, what's a public?
I mean, it's so radical. It's so radical because it's so contrary to our culture. I can see why the trolls are coming. But I mean, I find it very interesting because it's, it's a it's such an unfamiliar way for us to think of us just being a Western person who's born in a Western culture, to think of is there any physical punishment? Well, I don't think there's any physical punishment legally anymore
Mhm.
here, right? Except for the death
Mhm.
penalty. I don't think that, and unsanctioned things that happen, of course, probably all the
Mhm.
time, but on the books legally. So you're saying, okay, on the books legally, we're going to put down 100 lashings at the shopping mall. God, what would that look like?
Well, you could monetize the whole thing, right?
Oh no, you sell tickets.
It would be good for, I don't know, restaurants and, I don't know, cafes and stuff.
Oh my goodness. Oh, this is it. Wow, this
Staging.
is a new perspective. It's a very new perspective. But so so is there any way you really feel that this, from how you've thought this out, and obviously you're a very thoughtful person who likes to study things,
I try.
um you don't see, you see this as being the best solution,
Well, yes. I mean,
something.
I suppose I've always sort of enjoyed it, looking at political problems. I think the obvious thing is to do this and to do that or whatever, and then I get this sort of
Mm,
wall of we're not doing that. Go away. And you
mhm.
think, but why not? Because according to what you
Yeah.
say you believe and what you want to achieve, and you can do it. And it's like, yeah, but the sort of deep, unconscious, unacknowledged reasons, why not? And that was
Mhm.
really the real challenge. Reaching the obvious solution was easy because it's all in the books. That yeah.
Yes, back then, right, you knew, you had a recipe. You had a recipe for how to handle any given social situation,
Yes.
right? To how to handle, as the issues of people's, um I call it antisocial behavior, but it's also simply uh appetites. And there's, yeah, appetites and urges. I do think that I was listening to, hold on, let me see if I can, once I have to ask my husband something quickly, see if I can get who this was.
Mhm. Oh, hello, 3 people watching now. I'll read your comments. Thank you for. I'm sorry, Lamby, I didn't read your message, your post until you retracted it. Why do you do that?
Here, I'm back
Oh,
now
great.
when you're
Yes,
ready.
what was.
So,
Yes.
this was a Barry Weiss honestly episode, her podcast
Hmm.
Honestly. And again, I don't agree with everything with Barry Weiss either, but I do think that some of her stuff is very interesting. And this was I think she had a discussion with 3 people, one of whom was that musician that, what's his face? Who's that billionaire? Elon Musk was dating, or maybe is still dating. I don't know. She didn't do well in the debate. She didn't. I don't really feel like she was a very strong voice, but she had three three people kind of taking different sides of the issue of, was the sexual revolution good or bad for women?
Hmm.
And um and I thought it was very interesting, and I thought the most persuasive person in this panel was the woman, and I forget who it was, said no, it was not good for women. Overall, it was good for men because it
It
allowed a
lowered the
lot of
price of
behaviors.
sex.
Good for the alpha male too. She was saying, she was saying it's bad for every man that was not the alpha male, and bad for women, and lowering the price of sex. So, and I thought that the points that were made were very persuasive from this one woman. But I think if you just looked up Barry Weiss honestly, and I think it was called Was the Sexual Revolution Good or Bad for Women? It was a
It's bad
worthwhile
for
listen.
men and women who want to be responsible parents, who want to remain married, or men and women who want to get married. It'll make them hard to find a suitable partner. So it depends on what you want to do. But yeah, if you want to pump them and dump them, then yeah, it's great.
Well, I mean, she was saying that if you were the type of man that a lot of women were interested in, that that's kind of the only man that benefited. The only person that benefited was the desirable male.
Yes.
So there were a lot of losers, and women in general, typically were losers in that equation. So, I say this is interesting to me because I come from very much a liberal left. Like, I've always thought of myself as being very far liberal left. Everything is fine, we love everybody, all behaviors can be embraced, and I now I really realize, this is not I have an understanding where that comes from, and that comes from, I think, a very genuine urge to just make everybody okay, to accept everybody and embrace everybody, and embrace all behaviors that do not harm people.
I used to be a liberal too, Kate.
Yeah. So where I'm coming from then, and then to see and to listen to people and see, all right, well, this has consequences. This is not, there are reasons for rules. My father, who is the Catholic, who was the president of his local chapter of morality and media, who would lecture. Oh gosh, the lecture that I got on Ferris Bueller's Day Off. He hated that movie. Oh, he hated that movie. Just the disrespect, that this was celebrating disrespect. And I just thought, I just rejected his point of view so out of hand.
What's this movie again? I don't think I've seen it.
It was Matthew Broderick, right? Ferris Bueller's Day Off. It's just a stupid high school kind of movie where this kid tricks his parents and then tricks the principal at school and goes and has this great day off with his friends, and they're, and oh my goodness, my father couldn't stand this movie because it was just so essentially disrespectful and celebrating the kid who's getting his way and being selfish. And at the time, my father just appeared to me to be just a stick in the mud, and it's just so conservative and so silly. But it's that same old story the older I get. But also, the longer I'm around, the more I see, like, all right, I can understand why my father hated that movie. I don't think I'd react to it in quite the same way, but I do see his, because seeing where things have kind of gone to now, the extremes that things have come to, I understand why something that I at the time thought, oh, there's no harm in this, somebody else from a more conservative, starting point would say, oh yes, this is, this is really
Hmm.
bad. You know, just I was at a different place along that. Yeah, I'd accepted a lot, taken more things for granted as being harmless, which I think now when I hear my evangelical Christian friends talk about, I don't know, I guess I was talking to one of them about homosexuality and saying, doesn't this one part of the Bible look like these two men actually had a homosexual relationship? And she was saying, first of all, no, it was more of a Christian brotherhood relationship. Who
Oh,
knows?
David and
But
Jonathan.
yeah,
Hmm.
yes. And, we loved each other more than the love of a woman. And it was at least two men in
Hmm.
love. Or, it's, and that being celebrated as something pure and good. She, she was saying that from her point of view, homosexual sex is, there's nothing special or especially wrong about that from a biblical point of view, but it's fornication.
Or sodomy.
And that's, well, she's saying, she was saying it's no different than having an affair or something like that, because it's not sex in the context of a relationship,
Well, I would tend to
having
agree
children.
with her. You know, I don't, if people go, oh, it's unnatural, and it's like, well, um, if you're going to elevate it to that degree of heinousness, why are adulterers also stoned with sodomites? According to the Bible, it attracts the same penalty. So it's sort of like, well, you're not supposed to do it, but there's no need to, get on your high horse and say you would never do such a thing.
Right. She was saying, she was saying, which I just thought was interesting coming from that kind of a
Hmm.
Christian, that it's not the homosexual practice, it is just any practice that's not a man and a woman married, you know, having an intimate relationship, which, you can agree with or not. But I do think that as a interpretation of the Bible, that's interesting to me. Had not seen it like that
Yeah, I mean,
before.
I would use a Kantian principle of universalizability to sort of just extract from this prohibition the moral that if we're going to have sex, we have to marry and only have sex with our spouse, and if we want to cheat, don't boast about it.
So in your in your secular Quranism and your brothels, where you actually have to pay for extramarital sex, is there any punishment for doing something out of wedlock if you're going to a licensed brothel?
I would say that um, these transactions have to be legal in order to um, reduce the supplier of um, premarital sex, which is basically most women these days, right? Most women, we know, have had premarital sex, and it confuses the men because it makes men think, oh yeah, we can take them all for a free test drive and never have to buy the car, because if this is our practice, why wouldn't they try to take advantage? So um, um, it should always be like, okay, you want a wife, then go about getting the wife the proper way, and if you don't want a wife, you know where to go. And this would reduce
Hmm.
the number of women who feel they have to put out in order to stand a chance of getting a relationship.
Now, what would this do for, I mean, from an ethical point of view, and I do know there are many people who advocate for the fitness of prostitution as a profession being something that can be empowering for women. But do you think that that would be, from your way of looking at things, even if you think it would be functional in society, or it would contribute to a functioning society, do you think it would necessarily be good for the women who are working in those brothels?
I think eventually the numbers will decrease because if you asked any um, adolescent female, what would you rather be? Would you like to be a married mother or a prostitute? The answer would be clear, wouldn't it? I mean, from an early age.
Oh, so you're saying if marriage became stronger and more common, not as many women would choose that.
Yes, only fans would be banned.
Only
Only,
what? Only fans.
yes, and free porn, that would have to be banned.
Yeah. Pre-porn. Oh gosh. Yeah. Hmm.
It's just a sort of a
Yeah.
reorganization. I mean, we're never going to, eradicate the desire to have sex with people we're not married to, right? It's innate in us to think, well, you know, our spouse will not always be the one that we are most attracted to. Let's put it that way.
Mhm.
We're bound to find somebody more attractive than our spouse.
Yeah, and I think that it's definitely the I guess what you'd call the sacrament of marriage, or just the institution of marriage, has definitely, in over the decades, lost its kind of weight of uh, what would be the word? Something that is
Lost its
you're
sanctity.
meant, well, is, I know it more like its weight as something that you commit to as being a process through your life. You work in the marriage rather than being something that's, oh, maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. I was in a generation of kids who, I guess it's still true today. I mean, just so many parents were divorced, and so when you grow up in that situation, you don't see marriage as being a commitment. You don't see marriage as being a
Well, yes,
commitment.
and that I think is a danger. You've spoken to Nina Power, and she said something very profound about marriage recently, in Millennial, and she said marriage is somebody to help you to remember things with, or words to that
Mm,
effect. And
mhm,
and
mhm. Yeah, so mm,
because, well, we need to know people that we've known for a long time to help us remember stuff that otherwise we would have forgotten.
right, you're walking the same path. You're living the same life, but it's two different people. You're well, I guess in the Bible, what does they say? Becoming one flesh, right?
Yeah, but it's also like,
Whereas,
remember the time when went on holiday, and when the family reunion went wrong, or all this kind of thing. It affirms and
a life,
reaffirms our own identity. Just the fact that they remember something about us, that even if we don't particularly want to remember it, and they keep reminding us of it, is a reminder of our identity.
mm, right, there is something profound about a life lived together. It's a story created together and things remembered together.
Yes.
It seems like it seems like a obvious detail, but it is profound at the same time.
Yes. So, if you don't have anyone to remember, some major event in your life, and they weren't there, or they can only have a theoretical interest in it because you're trying to describe it to them, it won't have the same effect.
Mm. Mhm. Hmm.
And so these human relations and family connections are only possible through marriage. I mean, all these family reunions. Who's going to have a family reunion in their two-bedroom flat? It has to be someone with a big enough house with probably a spouse who's prepared to do with the cooking and the entertaining and the you know
So if this idea of sexual I don't know, let's call it promiscuity, but just
liberation from the rules of marriage.
well, casual sex being the real problem, and having a structured set of rules for
Mhm.
marriage being the solution for it. Um, why the Quran specifically for this as your guiding document, or what you are suggesting or offering to
Because it
Western
says
culture?
something very definite. Its punishment is very specific.
It's the punishment. It's the lashing that you.
Yes.
It says
You're not going to just sort of forget about it, like, oh, we're just going to
yeah,
disapprove of you
yeah.
and not speak to you.
There are there are consequences.
Yes, so you can say that from now on we're going to be privileging married parents over non-parents and treating unmarried parents as sex offenders.
This it's interesting. It reminds me of um, probably 20 years ago, maybe a little, and before that, one on the news in America, on the news, you'd hear stories pretty regularly about the American who is on vacation in whatever other country, who is now being subjected to lashings because of some infraction that they, a caning, that was it. But there were a number of these stories that it would highlight how shocking this was to Americans, that first of all, generally, that's something that would generally be seen as being not even something maybe you'd pay a fine for here or something, which goes to show that a fine is, as you say, it's not the same as a lashing. It is interesting. I'm not saying I agree with you or advocate for it, but I'm saying it is an interesting point that you're making about the power of a physical punishment for something that is prohibited
Well, it would
in
send
society.
the right message. Nobody would be in doubt. I mean, I know there've been, people saying, oh, we'll just withdraw their benefits or, something like that. It's like,
Mm.
no, it has to be kind of in your face. Like, oh,
Mhm.
mommy, why are these people being lashed in our shopping mall? And mommy will say, well, that's because, and then the message is sent and received.
Right? Yeah. Wow.
It would
All
have the
right. Well,
effect
that's
of
it. That's
deterrence and I forget the principles, but deterrence is yeah.
deterrence and reinforcement of a tenet of, your belief system or your cultural
Hmm.
assumptions. Okay. Yes, that person's being lashed because we don't um, have sex out of wedlock, and that person did.
Mm.
Right? That would be something along those lines. It would reinforce those belief systems, or mutually agreed upon laws, or at least enforced laws.
Hmm.
Hmm. Hmm.
Hmm.
Well, all right. Yeah, it is something. I mean, there is something interesting about the physical. Something that I will be thinking about in terms of this idea of a caning or something along those lines as being the power of a caning, because as I say, it was regularly reported on as just shocking, shocking that an American should be subjected to this. And it's just, I guess it was probably seen as being traumatizing, humiliation and pain.
Well, yes, and it doesn't even
Yeah.
have to hurt that much, because I don't know if you know that in Aceh province in Indonesia, on the island of Sumatra, this is what they do, and it sort of like it doesn't hurt that much. It is a caning. The humiliation is people waving their smartphones, recording you being caned, and then but that's not.
Did you go to school in
Yes,
England, to like grammar school, or your young years? Were
I
they
went to boarding school. Yes.
okay? So people were being
Oh no,
caned
no,
in boarding school.
it was a girls' boarding school, and
Okay, yes, it was different because my husband is Scottish, and
ah,
he was subjected to physical physical beatings
right,
for
yes.
whatever, being cheeky or
Mhm.
something. Not a lot, but I suppose it would be interesting to talk about in the context of people who have gone through that, and there are certainly enough people who've gone through that recently, in their own teenager
Yeah,
hoods.
I mean,
Could say,
yeah, I was going to say corporal punishment
say,
is actually much cheaper than sending people to prison, and sometimes they prefer it too, because
hmm,
in England there was this practice of birching that I heard about, and basically you take your punishment and then you go home, and the next day, or it's usually on a Friday, I think, and then over the weekend you recover from your corporal punishment, and then you go to work on Monday.
hmm, right back to work,
Yes.
stiff upper lip.
Well, yes, and oh yes, and before I forget, there was this American, a New York policeman who was
Yeah.
saying that this would be cheaper, and he wrote a book about it, and he was ignored because he was saying, look, just give um, convicted the convict the option of
Mm,
choosing incarceration or corporal punishment. So
mm,
nobody is being forced. Um, and,
hmm.
and and they still rejected it. And it seems part of liberal
Interesting.
identity to reject anything that might work.
And certainly there's a lot of corporal punishment that comes in with apprehending a suspect. Sometimes things come out, you know, in terms of potentially hitting a person more than is strictly necessary for uh, subduing them. Maybe some. I was saying is if things come out kind of in anger, I think that the job of being a police officer is very difficult, and I think there's probably a lot of fear and rage stuff that can come out as a result of that, just in terms of the stress of
Oh, police brutality, you mean?
police brutality. Yeah. So what I'm saying is, if there were more of a ritual around corporal punishment, I wonder if that could cut down on police brutality too. If you're structuring it, I don't know. That's very speculative. I'm not
Yes,
sure
his name was
that would.
Peter Moskos, and he wrote a book called In Defense of Flogging, raising all these points. So
Hmm.
he was mentioned in Harper's Magazine and The Atlantic.
What year was this? Hmm.
2011
Oh,
in
really? So
Harper's.
really recent.
Yes, and also
Oh,
2011 in The Atlantic.
I'm gonna write this here so I can look at that. In defense of flogging. There we go. PDF. It's available in PDF. All right.
That
Look at
means
that
it's free to
treatise.
read online.
Yeah. Well, I should probably get going along to start my work of the day in a little bit, just to
Well, thank you very much, Kate, for sparing nearly 2 hours with us. I'm very
it's been
grateful.
very interesting. This has been very interesting. Very interesting. It's very interesting perspective. And does give me things to think about. And I can see how you must be at the forefront of a lot of people's rejection and anger, because so a lot of the things that you're talking about and calling for just cross that boundary
It's
that people will
heresy
not.
and blasphemy to the
Yeah,
matriarchy, as I keep calling it, because it's
yeah.
the other it's the polar opposite to saying have sex with whoever, as long as you don't get
Hmm.
pregnant, or even if you get pregnant, you can get your abortion. You know,
Yes, yes. Well, it's the okay, yeah, and it was my father would have been against all of
Mhm.
that. The old school Catholics were not in favor of birth control. Only of the most mild form of timing things, but consequenceless sex was not meant to be. The whole purpose of sex was meant to have the consequence, right? If you're looking at it from that perspective.
Yes, yes. If you don't mind, we mentioned the grooming gang
Yeah.
story, and what I've been trying to do is point out that there is a concept called Gillick competence, which is basically named after this Catholic mother called Victoria
Uh-huh.
Gillick, who basically challenged the whole idea of the family doctor um, giving contraception to underage schoolgirls. And she was saying,
Yeah.
surely it cannot be that the government would allow family doctors to aid and abet underage sex. And
Yeah.
she appealed it to what is now to the House of Lords, which was the then equivalent of the UK Supreme Court, and they said yes, this is exactly how we mean things to be. Doctors must be allowed to give underage schoolgirls the pill if that's what they want. If they can prove
Yes.
that this is what they know. So there's the idea of Gillick competence is that the doctor has to be sure that the girl knows what she's doing, and what could happen if she did it. So obviously, the girl would say, "Yes, I know that having sex would mean pregnancy, and I'm here asking you to give me the pill. So I know what I'm
Yeah.
doing. Give me the pill." And
Mhm. And so this mother was saying this should not doctors should not be giving
and not
this.
telling the parents.
So I'm sorry, she was saying they they should be doing it and not telling the parents, or they should not be doing it and not. Was
Well, I
she
suppose
against
she
this
she
practice? Or,
yes, of course
you know,
she was, and I don't know
I'm sorry.
what her preferred solution.
No, but I'm sorry. She was for the doctors doing this or against the doctors doing this?
Against it.
Against it. Okay, that's what I thought. Yeah.
Because she felt that that parental responsibility meant that any underage adolescent living with you,
Yeah.
if they're having underage sex, you ought to know about it.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. It's treating a child as an adult in the sense of taking them out from under the wing of the parents and allowing them more what's the word, agency.
Well, yes, and then it led me to think, well, do even adults know if it is a good idea to have sex with, whoever they're thinking of having sex with? Do they know if it would end well? And the answer is most people don't, and most times it doesn't end well,
Hmm.
and therefore. Um, I mean, this would tend to, but nobody asks if it's, all right to have sex with your spouse. Wouldn't they say, they'll say, you should have sex with your spouse. But no such question arises if you're already married to the person you know,
Yeah.
um,
So, but now, why do you bring up this question of get a consequence in
competence, because
in,
um,
yeah, in relation
I was just
to
trying to say
mm,
the child would not know if it was a good idea you know um, for her to have
yeah,
sex with somebody she's not married to, and because of this concept of Gaelic competence, a lot of underage, you know of these underage girls were able to go on the pill and be exploited by these
I see what you're
child
saying.
prostitution rings.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and you're saying just because they know what the results of sex, unprotected sex are, does not mean that they are emotionally mature enough to be having sex at that point. And from your perspective, out of wedlock and everything else like that, that it is creating, uh, it is encouraging a society in which young people they can put themselves in the way of being vulnerable to prostitution rings.
Well, indeed, but you can imagine the modus operandi of the sex predator, which is to be nice to these girls, and get them to go on the pill, and
Mm,
then exploit them after they go on the pill.
yeah, yeah, and I wonder too if and I don't know the psychology of this exactly, but I did read something that there is, and I don't know if this is true or just hearsay from an article, but um, one article that I read said that there's a cultural uh, assumption from the part of the guys directing this that the local white girls are lesser in terms of their what you'd call what you here in America you'd say, oh, that's a slut, right? And so the idea in this thing is that,
Or
oh,
jailbait.
the local girls are sluts, we can do this to them or something like that. And that makes me think of people in a different culture. There's a culture in Buddhist circles of Buddhist teachers having sex with their followers, something that's really very prohibitive.
Mm.
But in the culture of America, where you have these people fawning over their whatever, their roshis or whatever they are, that they, maybe there's a concept, you have a different concept of a person in that culture. Oh, that's what they do, so we can do that to them or something along those.
Well, I mean, if people want to racialize it and say, that they're only doing it to them because because they are Muslim, we should also apply the same rule to the victims, because it's like, well, you're only being exploited because your mum didn't care what time you came home from school.
Yeah, right. So there is well, that's what I'm saying. You have a culture coming into another culture that where they're encountering this looseness, a looseness of oversight, a culture where young people are getting contraceptives. And it's not necessarily surprising that there might be a thought of, well, yeah, this is what these people do. This is
Yeah,
this is the
I
culture.
think that. Yes, I mean, they were saying, why didn't they, exploit, females of their own group? And the
Well,
answer must
because
be,
probably they're not on the streets, you know?
yes, exactly, exactly. So that was the thing. And why were so many white girls unsupervised?
Mm,
And then, it would lead to well, because there's so many unmarried mothers who are being encouraged by the government to have variously fathered illegitimate offspring
mm,
to claim benefits.
mhm. Yeah.
And nobody wants to talk about that.
Right, yeah, just the greater context of what's happening.
Yeah, because the welfare state is an unofficial sacred cow,
Mm,
because we've all become dependent on it,
mhm,
even the ones. So I think that it is another taboo, heresy, blasphemy, as we were saying earlier.
mm.
There's so many closed doors now that we
Yes,
are
yeah, and
told
then
to be open.
this is what's ridiculous. I think that if you don't agree, explain clearly and rationally why you do not agree, and that's how to change minds.
Yes. Oh dear. Can you hear the doorbell ring? I'll. Um, yeah, may I mute myself just for a minute? Or
You may go right ahead. That's fine.
hi. Oh, that was an Amazon package for me. Sorry about that.
It's quite all right. Well,
Yes, so I think all these things are linked, and I think people are deliberately refusing to make these connections, and because obviously it's kind of hard to say that you know maybe we are all to blame for a lot of pre-existing social problems.
well, one thing certainly leads to another. It's and the question is whether things were intended to lead to the place that they've come to, or whether it's just an experiment and this is, we see the consequences of certain decisions. Certainly you can read enough about that on the alternative news channels. Hmm.
Yes, and when we talk about the decline of empires, I think they all decline for the same reason, which is the tendency to feel invincible, and not seeing why people shouldn't enjoy the fruits of empire, and lower certain standards. And when the problem is finally noticed, everybody's in a state of denial
Mm.
because they're too hooked on that kind of behavior.
Hmm.
I mean we know that the ancient Greeks and ancient Romans, they were kind of virtuous at the beginning, and then succumbed to imperial decadence,
Mm.
and both practiced pederasty.
Yeah.
So
Yes, which is supposedly not acceptable in this day and age, although there is a lot of speculation as to how widely practiced it is.
Yeah, and this thing about the Kantian principle of universalizability, and it was, the whole idea of, is something good, moral or immoral, and Kant said, well, if you can imagine everybody in the world doing this thing, and how your society would be if you allowed stealing, if you allowed lying, if you allowed, um, you know, fornication, sodomy, adultery, and then if you think it would be a terrible place, then don't do it. But
Yeah.
you can take these principles to talking in religious terms, the sin of spilling seed, which is a kind of Jewish thing, and
Right.
it's like
No, that's Catholic too.
and Catholic,
Yeah.
yes, and I suppose if everyone didn't have sex with anyone else but themselves, the human race would also become extinct.
Yeah.
So better not.
Right. You also wonder, were things stated as sins just to say don't overdo it kind of thing. Yeah. I don't.
Yes, like you might get away with it if you do a little of it,
Yeah.
but not if you openly
Well,
do it
just
and boast about it.
there are going to be consequences. There are going to be consequences if something is practiced too much. Just like overeating, drinking too much, anything that and with all these things you're dealing with appetites and things that can come out of your control because they're driven by appetites. And to a certain point it becomes potentially something that you no longer have control of, and brings you back to your guy, the AA guy, who decided you really need to have a higher power in order to get power over your appetites. In that case, addiction to alcohol. But you could look at all these things as addictions or uh, appetite driven harms for yourself or for others.
Well, yes. So this whole psychological concept of we make a promise to somebody higher than us, or we'll be very happy to break promises to ourselves because we're kind of equal status to our different selves that say contradictory things, perhaps.
Yeah. Maybe you need to introduce lashings into the AA 12 steps.
It's like, well, just become Muslim, or not, or that's the thing. I think they're just sort of safety rails. These rules are safety rails. It's like, well, you want to break them, go ahead. But if bad things happen, you will make the connection that bad things happen to you because you broke those rules.
Well, I mean, I think, as I say, I do have to get going, but I think that part of what you're saying is just that the statement of these things gives a sense of what is to be considered good for society and the individual and what is to be considered bad. And when you're stating things like that in the context of a culture that denies that just about anything is bad except when it gets out of hand. I think our culture accepts that, oh, if you are addicted to pornography, if you're addicted to, too much sex with other people, if you're addicted to alcohol, too much, anything too much is considered harmful. But I think what you get down to is creating rules that show, no, you have to look at this all as harmful from the get-go, and you're just walking down the path of more harm. And that is where I think the great difference lies in terms of how this is looked at. Could you mute that, Dave? Sorry, it's my phone.
Oh, it's not an actual grandfather clock.
I just like the sound of it, but it's very loud.
It'd be quite
Anyway,
funny with some rap music.
yeah. So, but
Hmm.
I do need to get going though.
thank you again for your time. Perhaps we can speak again on other subjects, perhaps after the inauguration.
Oh yeah, well, of course. Yeah. So it's never a dull moment here in the United States. So
Yes, we're also excited for you,
yes.
and wishing we could have a vote.
Yeah. Oh boy, I don't. Yeah, votes. Well, that's a whole other story. But
Yes,
thank
yes.
you, thank you very much. It's been a very interesting conversation.
Thank you for all your time. Thank you, Kate.
All
Goodbye.
right.